18 December 2022. Lionel Messi joyfully raises the World Cup trophy draped in a black and gold beast. He does so following a World Cup held at the end of the year for the very first time to account for regional weather. By many metrics, this was the most successful and widely viewed World Cup to date. Messi, rightly so, was the center of attention on the day, but in the grand scheme of things, he was only really a side character. None of this would have been possible if not for a plan decades in the works, a plan that heavily involved but definitely was not limited to the French capital. A plan that was as successful as it was controversial. In 2008, Paris Saint Germain were minutes from relegation and experiencing rapidly compounding debt. 3 years later, they became a perennial winner of every domestic competition with the transfer budget of a Gulf state. France and Paris specifically has been a prominent area of focus for the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, and Qatar's acquisition of Paris Saint Germain has had a profound impact on sports, culture, the French economy, and much, much more, both directly and indirectly. Over the years, some reports have indicated that Qatar is in the process of decreasing their overall involvement in France due to regional difficulties. However, the diplomatic and political ties between the nations indicate that this would come with extreme complexity. In this video, we're keeping the focus on PSG, sure, but we'll certainly be touching on all of those topics and more. This is how the tiny nation of Qatar implemented one of the most ambitious pieces of branding known to mankind. And, well, the effectiveness and legacy of said plan, well, that's another question entirely. On the 12th of August 1970, Paris Saint Germain as we know it today was born. It might sound like that was pretty recent, because it was. The club does have much deeper roots though. It was the result of the merging of Stade Saint-Germain, a club established in 1904, and Paris FC. Paris Saint-Germain was the brainchild of three French businessmen, Guy Cresson, Pierre-Etienne Guyot, and Henri Patrel, all of whom felt there was an opportunity to create a truly major outfit in the French capital. In their first season in the second division, they won instant promotion. Paris Saint-Germain recorded a profit of 1.5 million francs during their inaugural 1970-71 year, but the joy was short-lived because only 2 years after this, the club was in debt, 850,000 francs. Good news, the Paris City Council offered to wipe their debt away. Bad news, they also demanded that PSG adopt the name of one of their former founding clubs, Paris FC. Why? Because it sounded more Parisian. The members of the board from the Paris FC delegation were in favor. The ones from the Stade Saint-Germain delegation were not. Stade Saint-Germain were a representation of the nearby town of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, after all. They did not want to give that piece of heritage up. So the club split. Paris FC got the financial backing from the city, and PSG was administratively relegated. So, in actuality, the PSG we know today was actually only established in 1972 in the third division of French football as amateurs. Yes, drama has always been at the forefront of this club. Although PSG proved to have the true staying power of the two and rose up from the bottom tiers all the way to the top by 75, while Paris FC slid all the way down. PSG have remained in the top flight ever since, but up until very recently, it was often a roller coaster of events and emotions, competing at the highest level in some years, even winning titles, only to drop down to relegation battles shortly after. But it's not like they were the only ones. French and European football as a whole has historically been an environment where teams rise and fall rapidly. Gérard Houllier gave PSG their first league title in '86. The next year, 7th. The year after that, 15th. Overextending financially was also very common, but this club has always been saved from ruin whenever smoke begins to appear. Understandably, there has always been a vested interest in keeping the team of the capital afloat. 50 million francs in debt by the early 90s, but again, not for long. A golden era was on the horizon. French television channel Canal+ bought PSG in 1991, wiping out all of the debt. And Canal+ were very serious about taking PSG to the big time. Coincidentally, TV broadcasting became a massive financial factor in this decade, something that directly led to a drastic increase in budget for the club and made PSG one of the richest clubs in France. George Weah, David Ginola, Valdo, Rai, Yuri Djokaev, and more. But very arguably the greatest acquisition was that of club president Michel Denisot, a well-known journalist and multimedia producer. Under his guidance, revenue soared. PSG claimed another league title, but this time remained competitive in the years that followed, coming inches from repeating the feat multiple times. They also became the second French team to win European silverware, as PSG won the 1996 UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. For the first time, really, in PSG's entire existence, the club experienced stability. However, by 1998, Michel Denisot decided to leave to pursue other ventures, and it appears that with him went that stability. They went right back to how things were prior to the 90s. High highs, low lows. The highs were exhilarating. Players like JJ Okocha, Ronaldinho, Pauletta, Marcos Simon all shone brightly, delivering cups. The lows included the highly anticipated but failed €34 million return of Nicolas Anelka, a player bred by PSG with what was believed to be a higher ceiling than Thierry Henry, but with an attitude that left a lot to be desired. New coaches were coming in each season, 11 presidents in the 13 years between 1998 and 2011, with an alarming amount of them being convicted and handed suspended prison sentences for various forms of corruption. The ownership structure was fractured. Canal Plus had become sole owners by 2005, but then sold only a year later to a consortium of Colony Capital, Butler Capital, and Morgan Stanley. Colony Capital became 95% owners by 2010, but then aggressively began seeking potential buyers. All the while, 2007 and 2008 were arguably the worst years in the history of the club, both from an internal and external perspective. Extremely narrow escapes from relegation on both occasions, particularly in 2008, where survival came down to the final day of the season. Ivorian Amara Diane was their savior on that occasion, scoring both goals in a 2-1 win that secured Ligue 1 status. A loss or a draw would not have sufficed. If you're a PSG fan and you don't think about this man daily, I seriously doubt your credentials. He may have done a lot more than save the club from relegation that day. Oh, and by the way, just to highlight the chaos that was going on, PSG won the Coupe de la Ligue in 2008, because of course they did. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, what did the fans think? In short, they weren't happy. Like most countries and cities with a rich football history, France has its fair share of grim history involving ultra groups and the like. PSG, as an institution, is no exception. 2008 was a landmark year for fan violence and hooliganism for the club. Fans were displaying banners calling opposition cities pedophiles, unemployed, and inbred. This was in the League Cup final that I mentioned earlier, and French president at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, a well-known PSG fan, was in the stands watching on as the banner was unfolded. He was not impressed. They were invading the club's training facilities, threatening players and busting up their cars because of the poor performances. There was a long-lasting history of racism within the most extreme groups, and that was only exacerbated by the poor performances. Unlike many other European ultra groups, PSG Ultras even had a history of fighting one another. Sarkozy and his government were looking at the situation, going, guys, please, can we not? And went on to dissolve several ultras groups, the most prominent of which was the Boulogne Boys, one of the oldest ultra groups in the country. I'm painting an extreme picture, and a lot of it was indeed extreme, but as I've already highlighted, PSG were a club that was near and dear to millions. The club was located in a very ideal city. The club had a very rich history. With just a little bit of TLC, fireworks could happen. So it was only a matter of time before their latest savior took center stage. Qatar is a tiny country, about 3 million inhabitants as of 2025, shockingly, with only about 11% being Qatari nationals. But what they lack in numbers, they make up for gas. The nation holds roughly 13% of the world global natural gas reserves, putting them in third place just behind Russia and Iran. As a nation that has historically been heavily reliant on its hydrocarbon sectors, some sources have claimed that as much as 81% of their government revenue is derived from gas and oil. Like others that are unlucky enough to be petrostates, they make a lot of money from the fruits of their land. However, by its very nature, this river will eventually run dry. Some creativity was required if Qatar were to have hopes of diversifying their affairs in future. Their ideas were simple, but robust, and considerable action has been taken to see them come to life. Qatar has set off to invest their massive wealth across the globe in several ways. The state of Qatar is the largest single property owner in all of London. They own 20% of Heathrow Airport, the most internationally connected airport in the world, which they utilize sparingly with Qatar Airways, the 6th largest airline by seat availability and the 7th highest by brand value. Shifting the focus back to domestic affairs, since the late 20th century and beyond, billions of whatever currency you can think of have been poured into construction of hotels, facilities intended for tourism, and hospitality. The hopes being that this leads to international visibility of local businesses and even promotes increased immigration of the best talent to grow said businesses. But there was a problem: branding. This is a wealthy country, but in the mid to early 2000s, they were relatively soft-spoken on the global stage, especially if you draw parallels between them and other high-profile states that surround them. And then, of course, you have their highly publicized human rights record, treatment of a large migrant worker base whom, may I remind you, make up a substantial amount of the country's population. You have the highly infamous reports of gender inequality and a lack of political freedom. Journalists practice self-censorship for domestic controversies. All of these factors have been known to affect perceived reputation. So, what's the solution? Well, we've been speaking about it all day. What makes sports stand out is the unity of action and representation, a unity that is seldom seen anywhere else. Performance in sports can be reduced to a quantifiable dimension. Only goals, seconds, and centimeters count, and so outstanding achievements or records can be understood by everybody. That's an extract from a 2001 paper by Otmar Weiss in the International Review of Sociology and Sports Journal. Taking a look at any of the Qatar development plans through the years echoes every sentiment I've just mentioned. Their plans spanned multiple sports. They needed to very publicly get involved to gain the international acclaim that they were looking for, and they have. But what's more public than the most popular sport in the world? Here's a disjointed but succinct timeline. 2005, Qatari Sports Investments, a government-backed shareholding organization, is formed. 2006, a major turning point as Qatar hosted the Asian Games. Roughly $3 billion was allocated as the preparation budget for hosting, and this event was seen as a wild success and acted as proof that Qatar were capable of organizing and hosting large, complex mega events. 2010.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
Controversial, extremely, especially considering the fact that many of the high-ranking officials responsible for this decision were banned for life from all football activities not long after this decision. However, none of this changed the decision. The first World Cup in an Arab country, a historic landmark. 2011, the powers that be decided to get into the billboard business. No, not those kinds of billboards, these kinds. Barcelona, a club famously known to not take corporate sponsorship on its shirts, maybe the last truly big club to do so, finally caves to the pressure. Qatar Foundation is plastered slap bang on the shirt of the best team in the world. 150 million euros over 5 years. In the same year, QSI purchases 70% of Paris Saint Germain for only 70 million euros. 70 million euros? Of course, the debts and the fact that the club had not been profitable since the 90s decreased the asking price. All debts were wiped immediately, and the real spending began as a new dawn emerged on the Parc des Princes. I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight just some of the reasons for why the optics of all of this were dubious. As we've already established, this part of the plan wasn't really about the money. For Qatar, at least. Former UEFA president, three-time Ballon d'Or winner and legendary former French player Michel Platini acts as indicator of differing motivations. Previously having voiced concerns that a World Cup in Qatar would not be possible due to the extreme heat, he was a known supporter of the United States' bid for the 2022 World Cup. That seemingly changed quickly, as it's been widely supported that in 2010, he attended a lunch at the Palais d'Élysée with French President Nicolas Sarkozy and Qatari royalty. He is on record saying Sarkozy openly wanted him to vote for Qatar, but never asked him directly. About 9 days later, he voted for Qatar to host. 7 months later, QSI bought PSG. Again, Sarkozy's favorite team. Platini's son, Laurent, was then recruited as the CEO of Burda, a QSI-owned sports apparel company. Qatar began investing billions into the French economy, and numerous trade deals have since been tabled. But none of this, not a single thing, halted what was to come. The train had left the station, and it wasn't about to stop for anyone or anything. Dream bigger, one of the many slogans of PSG. I made special notes of PSG's spending habits earlier on and how it got them into debt. This time around, they were playing a different ballgame. In QSI's first transfer window, they slapped 107 million euros down on player transfers, more than the previous 6 seasons combined. Slightly less than the previous 7, but I mean, who's counting at this point? This trend did not stop whatsoever. At the time of recording this video, PSG has spent over 2.2 billion euros on player transfers alone since 2011. To this day, PSG holds the record for the most expensive and second most expensive transfers of all time, a combined 400 million euros. For 2 guys. They went straight for name power in every category. Carlo Ancelotti was instated as manager in late 2011. Now PSG of course had to act very quickly because the allure of Everton is ever present. They installed Nasser Al-Khelaifi as club president, a former professional tennis player turned business powerhouse. He's also the president of QSI, Qatar Tennis Federation, as well as the European Clubs Association and BN Media Group, the overwhelmingly dominant force in sports broadcasting in the Middle East and Northern Africa. In many ways, he is the face of the operation, and they have thrived under his leadership. Like any major football organization, the best players, the best managers, even fans have come and gone. But while this has all been happening, PSG have created an empire. 10 Ligue 1 titles out of a possible 13. It will soon be 11 out of 14. And it's not just Ligue 1, it's full-on nationwide domination. At the time of recording, they have won 33 out of 46 available domestic trophies since 2011. One team has won 71% of all available silverware. And this is just football. The club has a handball team that is just as dominant, winning every Premier Division handball season since 2011, bar one. But remember, this is PSG. Controversy and drama has been afoot simultaneously to everything. PSG have been bankrolled by Qatar, of course, through various vehicles, but it seems that they have been proven to have done so to circumvent UEFA and FIFA financial regulations numerous times, and have even paid hefty fines in the past. Hefty to most, at least. They've suffered sanctions, but those sanctions have been subsequently lifted. Nasser Al-Khelaifi, being the public face, has been embroiled in allegations of bribery and corruption involving PSG as well as a handful of French corporations. He's currently in one as we speak. In early 2025, the news was dominated by headlines indicating that Qatar had begun the process of decreasing their involvement in France. Most of them reference Qatar's appetite to sell off part of PSG after having already sold off 12.5% in late 2023. There's also an opinion that France has treated Al-Khelaifi and other Qatari nationals poorly given their investment into the country. But I personally find it very hard to buy into any of those headlines, based on how large Qatar's holdings are in France and how much has already been committed. I doubt these are claims that will hold much weight in the near future. France themselves have gotten considerable value out of Qatar and PSG. Perhaps not in the form of taxes, but it doesn't take rocket science to see how intertwined all of these entities are. It's estimated that Qataris own over 7 billion euros in French luxury hotels and commercial properties, purchased under favorable tax conditions. They are exempt from withholding tax. The Qatari Investment Authority has substantial holdings in many large French organizations, mainly pertaining to energy, engineering, and media. France is heavily reliant on Qatar for liquefied natural gas, having signed a supply deal extending beyond 2050. Over 10 billion euros has been committed by Qatar towards French startups and general innovation between 2024 and 2030. Focus areas pertain to healthcare and engineering. I'm only touching the surface here and really only focusing on the monetary aspects as opposed to the strategic plays. But perhaps none of that really matters. For just a moment, consider the average person, the non-engineering, non-finance, non-corporate, non-diplomatic, red-blooded football-loving soul. The main thing that comes to mind when you think of the country of Qatar is, quite impressively, the 2022 World Cup. It's the highest scoring tournament to date. It opened, closed, and continued dozens of storylines. 1.4 billion people tuned in to watch a final that many believe to be the greatest final in the history of the competition. The two cover stars of the movie, that is the 2022 World Cup, were PSG players, and a Ballon d'Or was presented at the Parc des Princes. At the end of the day, Qatar set out on a mission. It had numerous angles, the majority of which I've not even come close to touching in this video. From a diplomatic perspective, it's clear that all of this was a massive success. This is where I pass the question on to you. Have all of their efforts succeeded in turning you pro-Qatar?